bad.
What's up? Another episode of Revolving Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Vance, also known as Ricky Varandas. I need to find a easier intro. You don't know how many takes sometimes I need to get that intro right. Sometimes I do it the first time. Sometimes I mess up on rolling the R's or saying Ripple Effect Podcast really fast. But it just kind of, it works. It's kind of what I say now. So I think you guys kind of expect it. So I'm going to keep doing it because it is kind of fun to say. But today we have, speaking of fun, we have a fun conversation. Producer of the docu-series The Con, Patrick Lovell. He is a really interesting guy who was directly affected by the financial crisis and really took a deep dive investigating that whole situation. And he has a great documentary called The Con that will be out August 7th, I believe. But the first episode, because it's 5 episodes, the first episode will be available on their Facebook page August 5th. So in our show description on our YouTube channel, you'll be able to find the links to their Facebook page, and you'll be able to watch that very first episode. And if you like it, hopefully you pursue the documentary and watch the rest of the episodes. I watched much of it already, and I really, really like it. So if you guys like documentaries and are fascinated with another take and another perspective and maybe a deeper take into the financial crisis, definitely check out The Con. Also joining me today in this conversation is my friend Sean Dustin from the Nowhere to Go But Up podcast. And I was recently just on his show, so check that out on my YouTube channel. I have a playlist for all my interviews called Ricky's Interviews. Very creative name, obviously. And you can see that interview and all my interviews I've done, like with Jason Burmis and Sam Tripoli when I was on Tinfoil Hat podcast. I just recently on microaggressions, and that'll be out shortly too, so check that out. Like I said, Sean Dustin co-hosts with me. He was one of the people who exposed me to this documentary, so I figured the least I can do is have him on and co-host with me, kind of share ideas and have the chat with me. So hopefully you guys enjoy this conversation. Like I always tell you guys, our Patreon page is the best way of supporting the show. I will have shirts out very soon. They're in the process of being made, but for the time being, Patreon's the best way to support the show. If you can't support the show financially, share the show, tweet the show. All my stuff is open source. Post it, upload it anywhere you want. The most important thing is getting these conversations out there. And then anybody who can financially support the show, great. You know, it helps with bandwidth, helps with storage, helps with all those expenses that go into having a show, cables, microphones, all that stuff. I think that's it. Oh, we have a Union of the Unwanted live stream alt media swapcast thing that we do. We have one coming up on the 3rd, which is Monday, and we go live at 7 p.m. Eastern time, and it's every other Monday. And every time we do one of these, we always try to have some of the same faces and also mix it up with some new guests and new perspectives. So it's fun because you never really know who's going to show up and who's going to join you and for how long they're going to join you. So it makes a really fun kind of a hangout discussion type thing. So people are really enjoying those Union of the Unwanted shows. So hopefully they keep growing, people keep spreading them, and hopefully we keep getting more and more people joining us. People are really just enjoying getting people with so many different perspectives and backgrounds and doing different research on different topics, bringing them together and just sharing ideas. So that's kind of the whole idea behind that. So I also start a playlist with all those shows. So if you guys are looking for the Union of the Unwanted episodes on my YouTube channel, you'll see that playlist. And if you're a Patreon supporter, I let you know way in advance who's booked on the show, and I have a very busy schedule ahead of me. So you Patreon supporters will know all about that. I have a bunch of shows already booked and with days and times, and I'm really looking forward to putting out some of these great shows and some first-time guests that I've been a fan of for a long time and been trying to get on the show for a long time that will be on finally sometime in August. So Thanks again, guys. Enjoy. I was gonna say enjoy your weekend, but I don't know when you're gonna listen to this. So enjoy your day, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace. I guess I'm ready when you guys are. If you guys are ready to jump in on this, let's get right in it. Well, thanks Pat and Sean for being with me. I really appreciate it. This is going to be a fun conversation. Sean, I was just on your show recently, so it's cool to reconnect again. The host of Nowhere to Go But Up, and Patrick, filmmaker, the series that nobody quite knows what we're going to talk about quite yet because it's not released yet. So hopefully we can get some attention and get some appeal for the docu-series before it's released. But thanks, guys, for being with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Totally appreciate it.
Well, I heard about your documentary from Sean, and Sean was a huge fan of it, told me about it. I started looking into it, watching it and whatnot. So I definitely, I'm a huge fan of documentaries. I mean, it's a great way of watching something entertaining, but yet also thought-provoking and informative. And so growing up, a huge part of my information came from documentaries. I mean, before podcasts, documentaries were my addiction. And so I'm always really fascinated with new documentaries and new projects or whatnot. So for people who are listening, who aren't familiar with the Con documentary and how you got into it, because this is actually a very personal story. This actually, what sparked this was your own personal experience. So how did this all happen? How did you get wrapped up in this story and fascinated with this whole, I guess I'll let you explain what it's about.
Well, sure. I appreciate that. And I had a brief conversation with Sean on the phone the other day, and it was pretty exciting because he fully got it and what it's all about. I mean, this is a multi-part series. And for your viewers out there, anybody who is paranoid about conspiracies, anybody who doesn't think that the system adds up to what their experiences are telling them, for anybody that has any interest in power, anybody who has any interest in actually how power works, either to the benefit or to the detriment of all of us, the Con answers these questions and then some. I think it's the most important story of the last 70 years, and it's not because I'm the filmmaker, it's because it's the truth. We live in a dystopia right now, guys. We live in a time where there's so much massive confusion. There's so much massive distortion. There's so much massive deception. And really, we live in an era where the body of investigative journalism is practically dead. Now, a lot of truth definitely lives online in the podcast if you talk to the right people, but how easy is it for people who don't have the facts to go on and talk at length about subjects they don't have any real knowledge of or any actual evidence of? So to get to your original question, I've been a producer for a long time. I've been a producer for over 2 decades. I've worked in Hollywood at Paramount Pictures and Warner Brothers, and I've done productions with some of the biggest names in Hollywood and entertainment and film and music and so forth. And that was just kind of my job. I was basically a go-getter, right? I make stuff happen, and that's what I do. And I'm an entrepreneur. And I came up, decades in the making. I came out of the '80s, and I wound up being a professional in the '90s, and that thing ran its course, and ultimately it ran right into a situation where I was a television producer on a show giving away houses all over the country between 2006 and 2008. I had a crew of about 70 people working on this production. We'd fly all over the country, and we'd find great people with great stories. And the idea of the show was to give them houses. And it was like a makeover show, but it was calibrated to basically, it wasn't extreme home makeover, but it was in the same space. But the reason I tell you all of that is very important to the ultimate story. So in 2007, the executive production team that were paying for this, and we were distributed all over the country, in syndication. So what that means is we're like WABC in New York City, we're on KCAL in LA, a variety of other places in Chicago. So we weren't on the same network, but we were broadcast in major cities and and typically in prime time. So the executive producers of the show were very wealthy. They were out of Seattle. One day they're flying around on Gulfstream jets. The next day, in 2007, suddenly they're going bankrupt. And I'm like, wait a second. I'm in a senior position on a television show after like 15 years of being in the business. So I'm a senior guy. I got, like I told you, we've got like 70 people on the broadcast. And, you know, I know how to make deals, by the way. So I put deals together all the time. I know contracts. I understand how, you know, the system is supposed to work, what's legal, what's not, all of those types of things. So I'm not a chump, right? And ultimately, I'm on this television show, and it wasn't the end all be all. It was kind of a means to an end for me, but it enabled me to get into a house with a young family. I was about to be 40 years old at the time, and I owned my first house. It was a nice house, but I got into a mortgage because I was making enough money to pay for the mortgage that was, you know, put in front of me. It seemed like everybody was buying homes at that time. In fact, everybody I knew were at the bars every night bragging about how many houses they flipped, quite frankly. And I was like, wow, it's a pretty interesting situation, but a lot of it didn't make sense. And suddenly, in 2007, this executive production operation that is flying around on Gulfstream jets one day is literally going bankrupt the next. And I'm like, what the fuck, right? So that's the first like sign of something bad's coming. The next thing I know, I'm literally not pulling in business for about a year. I decided to go off on my own. And I found a partner. It was amazing. I found a partner, big developer guy, and very rich. And I, you know a lot of wealthy people because when you do production and you hang out with rock stars and stuff like that, you tend to hang out with wealthy people. And I knew how to put deals together. And so I'm hanging out with this one guy, and his name is, it's not important what his name is, but he's a good friend of mine, great guy. And he agreed in principle to a long-term commitment with me as a partner. And I'm about to do the contract, and, you know, I get the offer back from him, and the ink's not dry. And suddenly it's September 15th, 2008. What does that mean? Lehman Brothers collapse. Next thing I know, all of Wall Street's upside down. My life is going down the drains. Like, I can't even tell you how fast. I'm like going from living six figures, you know, a year to literally nothing overnight because of this process. And suddenly all the money's vanished. Why? Because liquidity's gotten pulled out of the market, right? So I'm watching this stuff like on the edge of my seat, like, what the fuck is going on? And suddenly I get wrapped up in the foreclosure crisis. And what I mean by that is I get notices of foreclosure. I'm dealing with servicers at the time. I'm watching everybody on television trying to figure out what's going on. And nobody is speaking to my experience. None of it makes sense. And again, I know business. I know how deals are made. I think I understand our system, and yet nothing makes sense. The Obama administration rides a wave of a people's mandate, really, to kind of clean up all the what we thought at the time was all of the muck and the machinery. And as it turns out, Obama puts the same people in positions of power in his cabinet that had created this train wreck that destroyed my life in 2008. Now, I don't know any of that at the time. I'm just picking pieces out left and right? So one thing leads to another. This tsunami, this avalanche, this incredible economic maelstrom comes and wipes me out, right? Now, incidentally, a lot of your listeners are probably in the same exact position right now because we're about to go off the cliff again, but we'll get to that eventually. So I get spit out in the desert. You know, I feel like I'm naked. I've got my family on my back. I'm trying to find refuge in ways to figure this out. There's nowhere to turn. It's like it's over. Right? So I end up walking up Little Cottonwood Canyon. I live in Utah, and I'm about to cash it in. We have a statement in Utah, in any place where they ski and snowboard. When you send it, that means you fly off a cliff. You're going to catch huge air. That's just part of our terminology, you know, vernacular. And I got up there, and my life was over. I was in, 6 inches of tossing myself off a 500-foot cliff because nothing made sense. And I don't know how serious I was, but my life had ended up to that point. And I was almost 40 years old at the time, to give you an idea how long this process has been. And I sat up on top of the cliff, man, and I was like, you know what? Fuck this. I'm going to find out what happened. I'm going to figure this out. And this many years later, I did. And it's the largest criminal conspiracy and conspiracy of lies and cover-up in history. And we've got it with factual evidence of who did what, when, and how this whole thing fits. And that's what the con is.
Yeah.
Well, brought up Obama. I mean, I don't know if you saw the email that told, they had suggestions on who to put on your cabinet. It was all like Goldman Sachs people and whatnot. And I think it was from somebody from Goldman Sachs who said, hey, you should put these people on your cabinet. And then almost exactly as that list of suggestions, the same people were on his cabinet. It was, he basically are run by the bankers, and they're all run by the bankers. I mean, the bankers control throughout history. They've controlled everything. I mean, it's
you got it right. You got it right. But and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to pick up your point. So imagine, right? Imagine like the ultimate criminal syndicate. Let's just talk about the Gaudis, or any of those 5 major crime bosses in New York during the 70s, and all of the the machinations of the power of the mob and all the stuff that they'd been into forever, really, right? And how they operate. Imagine those guys literally somehow working it to where A, they get their guys at the head of the DOJ, and B, their guys at the head of the SEC in the Office of the Comptroller. So all of the top guys that are basically working for the big money to make sure the big money doesn't get taken down. And who's the big money in this instance? You just said it, right? The banks, right? Mm-hmm. But the banks ultimately, and this is a key consideration, they're made up of people. So it's the banks not committing crimes. It's literally bankers committing crimes.
Well, that's the thing that bothers me about like this idea of like, oh, corporations are people. Until you commit a crime, then it's like, hey, you can't sue us, and the corporation doesn't exist anymore. It's like, how ridiculous is that? I thought you guys were people. Then you should be able to go to jail just like people do. It's obviously a giant loophole. I mean, banks. I mean, Prescott Bush got in trouble with the Trading with the Enemy Act because he was doing deals with the Nazis. I mean, you go throughout history, the bankers could care less about ideologies, morals, and not just that. Debt is a extremely strong tool because you put somebody in debt. And especially, I mean, look at college, for example. You put a kid in debt, you just get out of college, you have all this debt. Oh, wow, you got a high-paying job, but you're in the hole, 6 figures. So who gives a shit? You're not going to be in the positive for a long time, which means you're stuck at that shitty job. You have no flexibility to move, pursue a different career, all the stuff. They have you by the balls. And that's the thing that, like, they give I know parents all the time who say this. They're like, my kid's in college. They have no liquid funds, and I'm getting pre-approved credit cards in the mail for my child. And it's like, why? And I'm like, because they want you to be in debt. No kid is making great decisions in their teens and early 20s. Mm-hmm. I mean, I didn't make any good decisions in my teens or early 20s, and they know what they're doing. They're putting you in debt, and then you're stuck in this cycle of pay, this job you hate, you buy some material things to make you happy, that's temporary, and then and then you go back to your shitty job and you create some more debt and you go back to your shitty job, and it really it can ruin people's life. And yeah, I mean, so your story, I think, touches a lot of people. You said that you lost everything. What specifically? Was it the fact, because during the housing crisis in 2008, a big thing was like, hey, these are your payments, monthly payments, and all of a sudden, like, that bank, overnight doesn't even own that loan anymore, and next thing you know, your payments and interest went sky high and you can't afford it anymore. Is that something that happened to you?
Well, so to speak, yeah, but not so much me, as I've learned about all of those things as this incredible journey, unwound, quite frankly. And that was the whole purpose, was to unwind what became a crime. I had no idea what I was getting myself into at the time, but everything you said is spot on, by the way. And I love that quote by George Carlin. George Carlin, they've got you by the balls. And yes, it is engineered. But so to the people out there that are like, yeah, but it's fucking debt, man. You get into a contract, you take out, loans. They're doing you, good. So you got to pay the loans back. Don't get into business that you shouldn't do. And that's upon you as a responsible citizen to not get in over your head. That's what they say, right? Well, okay, great. I can buy all that. But there's a bunch of different ways we can decouple all this stuff. But let's just start with the basics based on your question to me. I was that guy, right? They had me over a barrel. I had the 6 figures. I'm into a new house. I got the family. You need the income, right? And so when all of that went away, it was like, oh my God, my life is over. That's the American dream, right? I mean, at least that's what I was thinking I was living in at the moment. And it became my American nightmare. But, to further that point, though, in terms of what it led to and what I lost and how that motivated me, Again, like I come from the 90s, right? So 80s, 90s, but two films really set this up in terms of my thought process. The first was The Usual Suspects, when Kevin Spacey declared the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. Couple that with Denzel Washington and Devil in a Blue Dress when he was playing Ezekiel Rawlins, and he said, I got tired of them pissing on my head telling me it was rain. They must have thought I was some kind of new fool. So what I had to deconstruct, right, is we're believed that we live in a nation of laws. We know that there's these institutions. There's the FBI. There's the SEC. There's the Department of Justice. There's a smorgasbord of alphabet soup acronyms that are regulators that are supposed to prevent what I was in the midst of, right? But as it turns out, they didn't act. Now, why could that possibly be?
Because they were a part of it.
Is that hard to believe?
Not now, considering everything that I've known and everything that I've seen and where I've been. But you know where I think the problem does lie, though, is that people don't understand how our system actually works.
There you go.
You know what I mean? And things that I've been watching from, modern monetary theory and, with Jeffrey Ginter, and also Peter Schiff, what he's been talking about. I just recently watched the show on with the Rogan, his episode, and where did he go?
Oh, you still there, Pat?
Yeah, guys, I just had to get up to close my window because there was some.
Okay. Yeah, and on the Rogan one. So I mean, it's really what I'm coming to the conclusion that I don't know shit about how our system works and what the debt and how it actually, printing money in the fiat currency system and how it's designed. I mean, I got a crash course this morning at 2:00 in the morning watching that Peter Schiff explain it. And and I watched Jeffries, and
I'll give you some good documentaries to check out. James Corbett's Century of Enslavement, which is, the title is a great title because that's what we're talking about. Debt really does enslave you. And then also you look at Ben Dyson wrote a good book on it. He's from the UK. He's been on my show. He talks about how, and then there's a Zeitgeist addendum. The beginning of it, they really focus on, and this was like, some influential documentaries in my life was the Zeitgeist movement and some of those documentaries. That documentary breaks down exactly how banks just print money that does not exist, and they and you can get into this, Pat,
Actually,
much better than I can.
The banks don't they don't print the money.
Well, not print money. I'm sorry. What I mean is they loan out money. I'm sorry.
Right.
Yeah, they loan out money that doesn't exist. Yeah.
Conduit. And see, so you guys touched upon something that's incredibly important. You know what you know, right? And so I'm a college graduate guy, and that's what I was trying to paint out before. I come up, I'm a professional. I work at Warner Brothers and Paramount, wind up being a senior producer. I mean, I was by all, markings relatively successful. Trust me, I wanted to be a lot more successful. But the bottom line was I got played by the system. And the reason being is because in the end, guys, this is a crime story, okay? This is a crime story of massive, massive volumes, right? This is like gazillions of times bigger than Watergate. This is gazillions bigger than anything that we've ever come to wrap our heads around because nobody did the work, particularly from the institutions. They did to cover it up, and I'll get to that in a minute, but also the media who could never even tie their shoelaces together. So there's been a potpourri of stuff that happened on the 2008 financial crisis, right? Some better than others. I think most people know the film The Big Short. The Big Short actually did, I think, a very nice job of trying to uncouple or decouple a lot of the issues that made up the story. But one weird reality is that it's categorized as a comedy. There's nothing, comedic about 16 million people losing their homes and what this thing led to with hundreds of millions of people that were impacted through pension loss and so much of the system rotted to the core. But what we need to be able to let everybody understand in this world, and in fact, I know from talking to you, Sam, Sean, is the nature of criminality, right? So if for example, let's say you've got a wife that you're suspicious that's cheating on you. There's a completely different mindset of thinking she might be and trying to read things that you don't have evidence on, and then actually having the evidence, right? So we go from the situation of common knowledge to specific knowledge. And that's always the case, whether it's Harvey Weinstein and a 2 decades long, him getting away with systemic, rape, or Epstein for that matter, 2 decades of that. In the end, there's a trail, right? And so those guys like Epstein and Weinstein, for example, it goes forever until it's busted because of the critical mass of people that were like, what the fuck? This needs to be held accountable. So why is it up to the people in critical mass to embarrass the people in power to take these things down until it's like decades in the making? Well, you could take the same sort of scope with our story, but multiply it by trillions. Because in the end, what we do is, and it's a miracle through a tragedy. So we break this up like, this is how long we've been in the mix making this story. So do you guys remember a crime series investigation on HBO called The Life and Death of Robert Durst? Did you guys ever come across that?
I know the title. I don't think I've ever watched it.
Yeah,
so
I don't think so.
I'll give you a thumbnail of it. So this thing came out, I think, let's see, we're 2020 now. It must have been around 2015. And my partners and I at the time were like, okay, you can't fit the immensity of the story that we found in the con that we unraveled into one 60-minute or 90-minute documentary. It's impossible. You have to understand how all of these pieces of this giant puzzle fit together to get to the point that Sean made earlier. You know what you know. So you got to be informed. You got to really go on the journey to understand what this is all about. But most people aren't documentary people like yourself, Ricardo, from the sense that they want to learn. A lot of people want to be entertained, right? So you got this kind of convergence, and it's a bit of a dilemma. But as investigative journalism was dying in print because of the way commercial products work, and there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on with that, but suddenly there was this revolution in television with long-form investigation, starting with this show called The Life and Death of Robert Durst. It was about a guy who was a real estate developer, huge rich guy in Manhattan, who ended up chopping up a bunch of people to hide from crimes he was involved with, and he got away with it until the show was able to lay it all out. And then eventually the DAs who were involved with it got new evidence and put this guy away. In our particular case, what we realized was we had the story initially because when I pulled the thread, and because I'm an investigator and because I come from the 80s and 90s and I watched films like Oliver Stone and all of these others, I'm suspicious enough to know when I'm getting played, my metaphor earlier, right? And nothing was adding up, particularly in media. So I started going to the sources that did make sense, right? So I started asking whistleblowers. Okay, wait a second. I saw you mentioned in this Matt Taibbi article, and you're talking about this, but it seems like there's a lot more. What can you tell me? So suddenly I'm getting the full diatribe, right? That doesn't appear in print. Now suddenly I find that whistleblower connects to another whistleblower. Oh, now I got 2 big pieces of the puzzle. Now that makes sense. What else is there, right? So then suddenly it becomes this constantly opening up the doors and finding out more and more information that you find out was covered up, or because they're whistleblowers, the CEOs and the HR departments did the exact same thing they did with Weinstein and Epstein. They buried it, and they basically took out the people who had the information. Same in this story, except fortunately for me, these guys are all alive. Now, we had that story initially, and we went to Showtime, for example, and we pitched them on the whistleblower stories. And they're like scratching their head, and they're like, I don't think so. Go to Alex Gibney. See if Alex Gibney will executive produce it, and then maybe we'll talk, right? So I go to Alex Gibney. He's one of my heroes. He's one of the greatest, documentarians of all time. And I go with him with this mammoth discovery, huge information that you would think a guy like Gibney would be all over. Yeah, he's like, maybe we could put him in like one episode of Dirty Money. I'm like, no, it's way bigger than that. So we pass, whatever. And one thing leads to another. And my partner, he discovers this crazy story. He discovers this crazy story of a woman. She's a 91-year-old African-American widow. She lives in a town called Akron, Ohio, at the Northeast. And she's lived in her house for 5 decades. She actually got into that house because both she and her husband, Robert, came from the agrarian South out of Jim Crow. So they migrated to the industrial North Midwest to where they could get jobs. He ends up working in the rubber plant and the car industry. He saves enough money. They buy the home outright. 5 decades later, on a horrible day in September of 2008, when the whole economy is imploding, the sheriff shows up at her door, knocks on the door to evict her from the house that she believes she owned. She said she'd been calling the sheriff's office because she'd been getting notices of foreclosure and she didn't understand why. She owned her house. She didn't understand why they were coming. And then they came to evict her after her trying desperately to prevent that from happening. And she had two choices: go in the streets homeless at the age of 91, or do what she did, which was take a gun to her chest, and she shot herself in the chest 5 times. She didn't die right away from that, believe it or not, but she ended up dying about 6 months later from those gun wounds. I can't believe it when I think about it. It's just like, how do you not die from shooting yourself in the chest 5 times? We've got the forensic evidence of her, bullet holes through her chest, her shoulder, and so forth. But she survived, and then she died 6 months later. But here's the thing: out of this tragedy, she was a miracle. So through this Pandora's box, my colleague and I, this guy Alex Tennant, who's an associate producer of mine, we were trying to get the sheriff, because when you recreate stuff for documentaries, you got to make it cinematic. So we wanted to talk to the sheriff that arrived on the scene that was actually that day there evicting her. He didn't want to talk about it. We had to go be just relentless in finally convincing him to go on camera, and he did. And I got to give all credit to my associate producer. It's a miracle that he did it. I'll remember the day. It was like cloudy. It was like one of those investigations. It was raining, and I remember him because we had exhausted all the opportunities to get this guy on camera, and he wouldn't do it. And finally, we just went to his door. My colleague banged on the door and just gave him this huge story up front of why he had to be on camera. So he reluctantly said, "Fine, I agree." We shoot this interview with this guy. And after I asked him all of these questions, he's like, "Oh my God." He's like, "You guys have got to talk to some people I know." So through him, I discovered this task force that was put together by the former Attorney General of Ohio. And they were studying all of these crimes in that vicinity, which were a pandemic at the time. And suddenly I find out, and this is what's so crazy. My colleague, my partner on this project forever, this guy who's the director, when we started this project several years earlier, he said, "Why wasn't this indicted or convicted under RICO?" Which is, of course, racketeering and corrupt influences, right? This is what was made for the mob. And we were like, yeah, that's it. Why didn't they do that, right? That was our question. So one thing leads to another. In this miracle through this tragedy, we find this task force got a RICO conviction for these crimes that were small levels of what was happening nationally. Okay? So what we found was the same crime that Ohio convicted of RICO, because there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, were the exact same model that was happening nationwide, except the Department of Justice didn't take the CEOs out of Wall Street on RICO, did they?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see a bit of a peculiar question? Why would it be possible to convict small level players, but not the heavies?
Because those were the ones that were supposed to get sacrificed to satisfy the need, and the other people were let go. That's what it seems like to me.
Because they own the system. So,
Yeah.
So this is a crime investigation. Everybody's in on it. Okay,
Yeah.
So you guys probably know that in finance, or if you're going to buy a house or a car or a student loan, there's different pieces of the puzzle. The way it works with home loans is you typically have a mortgage lender, and that mortgage lender is tied to a bank that lends, right? Some sort of financial institution. But in between, you have appraisers that give the appraisal of the home. And then you have underwriters that work for the banks. And all of that process is a stopgap to A, make sure that the home is the value that you're asking or in the vicinity based on all sorts of calculations in the industry. And B, that loans aren't going to get made that aren't good loans, right? So in the old days, the banks that were providing loans, like when we think about the loans, of the 50s and the 60s, you think of like a white guy in his suit, and he's like giving a loan, and everybody wants, how magical is it to get that loan? You can get in your house, you can build your wealth, but most of that is predicated because you've got an income. right? And so you're a good risk for that bank. And when that bank loans you the money and everybody else the money, they're doing it because you're a good risk, because they know you can pay that loan back because they're going to carry you for 30 years or 40 years, right? That's the idea. That's not the world we live in now, and it hasn't been since really the late 90s. Maybe, quite frankly, a lot before that. But in terms of how it works, because like you so aptly pointed out, Sean, there's so many different pieces of the puzzle, because you have the way people get loans, but that's got to be funded from somewhere, right? In this particular case, it's funded by Wall Street banks. They provided warehouse loans to all of these lenders all over the country. So there were all of these lenders, what we call shadow banks, like Countrywide Bank or AmeriQuest or Greenpoint Capital. They were all over the place. I'm not sure where you guys are located, but like in California, AmeriQuest and Countrywide were everywhere. But they're not good. They're lending institutions to basically get as many loans in the pipeline, and then they basically give those to investment banks, and all of these stopgaps are in between. So on top of like the people I've already mentioned, then you get into the situation where you have rating agencies. So millions of these loans were packaged into what we call tranches. And then they were sold upstream to Wall Street. And that means that they were sold to pension funds. So pension funds like, let's say, the fire department, the police department, the school teachers association, Ford Motor Company, all of those pensions are what we call institutional investors. And they're investing in a whole variety of potential investments that are supposed to have great returns. Now, at that time, nobody would have ever banked against the American home market. That was like the golden goose, right? Nobody got into a mortgage that they couldn't afford to pay back, and nobody would ever lend to somebody that they wouldn't pay back. But that all changed because it became about fees. It became about maximization of getting as many loans in the pipeline to send upstream to these pensions that supposedly had so much return, and it's all built on quarters. So the money's churning. People are like, okay, I got houses. I'm into a house. I'm flipping a house. I'm doing this and that. Is that the same thing if you're working in a factory for 40 years and you're in the same place forever? Are you a similar risk, do you guys think?
I would.
So if you got rid of the golden goose, which is, of course, the manufacturing, part of the economy, and people had jobs and they had longevity and they had value and they could own their homes and so forth. If you get into a Ponzi scheme and you're flipping things, is what we ultimately get into, you're going to train wreck the whole thing. But it's all predicated on fees, right? So the broker's getting a fee, the appraiser's getting a fee, the lender's getting a fee, the underwriter's getting a fee. Then the ratings agencies that are packaging up all those loans for Goldman Sachs, they're getting a fee. But they're all getting a fee to look the other way and to get the worst product in as fast as possible, and they all know it's going to blow. But they're all passing it along the way because as long as they get paid, they don't care what happens downstream. So eventually, this whole thing, because in the derivatives market, which is upstream, so for example, in 1998, we had a $13 trillion derivatives market globally. And there's a lot of commodities that go into these things, and people bet different ways, and they can hedge bets and yada, yada, yada. By the time you get to the 2008 financial crisis, it's $600 trillion in the derivatives market. It exploded exponentially. And it was all predicated on this housing market. And then people started not paying their mortgages because they never should have got those mortgages to begin with. Or they got sold some sort of adjustable arm, or they were set up for failure. And that's a whole other story. But eventually the whole thing collapses, right? And so the government has to kind of implode on itself. And there was this famous meeting between our former Treasury Secretary, John Paulson, who came from Goldman Sachs. In fact, his predecessor, Robert Rubin, came from Goldman Sachs, and he was Treasury Secretary for Clinton. And then Paulson came from Goldman Sachs and was Treasury Secretary for Bush. You see the pattern? Doesn't matter who's in the presidency, what party they come from, Goldman Sachs is in control, right? And so, there's been articles about government Sachs. But in this particular case, so Goldman was up to its eyeballs in this stuff, right? So when everything crashed, they were going bankrupt. Now, understand this. That's part of the plan. So remember we said at the very beginning that, we blame banks all the time. It's not banks. It's bankers, particularly the CEOs. So the fish rots from the head. And this is all called control fraud. So what they do is it's all built on the short term. It's all built on this giant Ponzi scheme of sawdust and they're getting paid billions. And if they can walk out or loot, it doesn't matter. The institution's going to fail. They get their money. But in this particular case, in capitalism, we're supposed to have creative destruction, right? So if you do stuff that you're making bad business decisions that are going to lead to it exploding, well, eventually you go bankrupt, right? Is that what happened to the too big to fail Wall Street banks after the great financial crisis? No. We were told that the government was going to have to circle the wagons and pony up $750 billion of emergency fees, which was called the Troubled Assets Relief Program, to save the system. Guys, that was a drop in the bucket compared to what these cats got away with. We ended up, the Federal Reserve pumped $29 trillion into the system that created this gargantuan wipeout, and we never had any prosecutions. 29 trillion was the icing on the cake that came from the Federal Reserve to backstop criminal enterprises. It's insanity. And this is why we live in the system we live in today. The same thing is happening right now.
And then doesn't it that kind of go into, the governments keep bailing people out and kicking the can down the road instead of letting the free market, just cancel them out if they're bad actors, right? And it's so does that kind of play into where we are and where we are going? Because if I've listened to a lot of people and their advice is get ready for it, start preparing.
Great question, John. You're awesome about that, because here's the story, right? The economy crashed in 2019, just so you know. We had to put up, the Federal Reserve had to pony up $7 trillion to back up what we call repo, overnight lending, to backstop the commercial run in the commercial market. Now, by the way, in 2008, that was the exact same thing that happened. And by the way, it happened for a reason. That was the Big Short. So did you guys see the Big Short?
Yeah.
So you remember the hedge funds were betting, they realized none of these things that people were investing had sustainability, so they started shorting the market. So the real story is those guys were thumbnails to the big play. Goldman Sachs was beyond comprehension into this whole thing, okay? And by the way, they were vertical. So they owned all the bad originators. They owned all the bad elements that I told you about. And then they were selling to their pensions, and they were shorting the pensions, okay? So let's just say they had Central States, which is all these Teamsters from around this, like now what is Trump country, right? So you've got the guys from Ohio and Kentucky and everything else that are the guys that are loading the coal, that are in the mines, that are doing whatever, and they're transitioning it all over the country for delivery. Those guys, their pensions after 4 decades, right, are in the hands of Goldman Sachs, and they're shorting the market. They know it's going to blow. And get a load of this. How do they know it's going to blow? Because they're hand-picking the tranches that are going to be in the worst of the worst tranches based on the worst of the worst loans that they know is going to blow. So they set everybody up to blow, and they're going to pick it up on the shorts, right? That's what they did. That's what you can do when you're the house. They're the house, okay, in this particular case. And they're not the only ones. There's many others. But going back to where Henry Paulson was, and I guess I could conclude this part of the story this way. Henry Paulson was the CEO of Goldman Sachs. The guy becomes Secretary of Treasury. He goes to the banks without George Bush. Bush doesn't know how any of this stuff is working. And he goes and he makes them sign a 3-page letter saying, you're going to accept everything I tell you to do, and it's going to work out for you. Don't ask questions. He says this to all the banks because they don't know how bad the derivatives play is, right? And ultimately, he ends up giving them $29 trillion. Now, this happens over the course of time within the Obama administration. But what ultimately happened is that, and this will probably blow your minds. Well, actually, let me before I get into this, I want to ask you guys a question. What is your knowledge of what happened in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis? Do you think government did any investigations into this?
No, of course not. It's a revolving door. It's governments, and this is the thing is like, and I've said this a lot on the show. People on the left think corporations are the root of all evil. People on the right think government's the root of all evil, and they don't realize they're all in bed together, and it's one and the same. Yeah.
And what's that called if they're above the law?
I'm not sure.
Tyranny. Okay.
Oh, tyranny. Yes, okay. Of course. Yes.
Let me give you a quote. Came from this guy Frederick Bastiat. He came out of 17th century France before the Revolution, and he said, when a group of men in society discover plunder for power, they create a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it. Does that seem kind of like where we are?
Mm-hmm.
So you have this system. So to answer my question to you, and this is what's so amazing because of how big it was. Yes, indeed, the government actually did a 9/11 like investigation. It was called the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission. It had over 1,000 witnesses. It lasted for a year. It was bipartisan, and it ended up with 11 criminal referrals. We have on camera the guy who was the head of the so-called bipartisan commission, and they did 11 criminal referrals to the Department of Justice. And what he tells us on camera is that we thought this was just the beginning after everything I just told you. He said, this is Phil Angelides from California. We thought this was just the beginning. The Department of Justice buried it under Eric Holder. By the way, where was Eric Holder before and after his involvement in the attorney general? And to your point, Ricardo,
where was
Sorry,
he?
I'm talking fast, and I apologize. There's a lot of information. But Eric Holder, the Department of Justice, the head of the Department of Justice under the Obama administration, came out of a white shoe law firm. I was about to say Sullivan and Cromwell, but it's God, I can't believe it. I talk about it all the time. I'll bring it up again in a moment. He came out of one of the top white shoe law firms in the nation, right? Who were actually up to their eyeballs defending these financial institutions. And then after he leaves the Department of Justice, he goes right back to his job, but at a much higher rate. He got paid big time for protecting Wall Street. So to your point, it's a racket. Yeah. What are you going to do when the institutions are filled with the guys that are working for the people that are defrauding everybody?
Were you thinking of Covington and Burling?
I was. Thank you for that.
Yes.
Covington and Burling. That's exactly right. And I can't believe I couldn't read because get a load of this. Covington and Burling is equidistant between Congress and the White House, interestingly enough, their offices, and they have been since the Civil War.
Well, the thing is, the banks have so much power. I mean, you look at banks, Wall Street. I mean, look what happened to Elliot Spitzer, right? I mean, why did he get busted? He got in trouble. I mean, that whole story was basically because he was actually giving Wall Street a hard time. Yes. I actually had one of the women that was actually involved in that on my show. She wrote a book about it. She got investigated and all this other stuff, interviewed by FBI and whatnot. But it was obviously like they were just trying to shut them up. It's like, no, I mean, our systems, and that's the problem with our system. It's like you can't just remove one bad apple because the whole system's fucked. Like, and that's the biggest problem is that, I mean, I've had Jack Abramoff on my show. I mean, it's hilarious. Yeah. And it's hilarious because he's exposing the same system that he obviously profited from and whatnot. But I had him on afterwards when he got out of prison and he wrote his book because I think that somebody who's in the inside who actually is willing to discuss how these laws and these rules, the loopholes with everything, and how everybody kind of knows the loopholes and all. Yeah. I mean, he had a company that was that could make products that was made in America, quote and unquote, but it was off the coast of America. It's a little island, but it didn't have any of the labor laws of America. But yet, because it was a property of America, you could put on the product made in America. And, everybody knew what was going on. And then, so there was some conversation about it. They sent some politicians there to go see like what was going on and investigate. What do? They sent them to a 5-star resort where they golfed and all this stuff, came back and said, no, everything's fine there. I don't see any sweatshops, and it's like, and that's the system. Like, the lobbyists write the bills most of the time. The language in the bills are like, here's the language, just put it in there, we'll make sure we get you some money, don't worry about it. I mean, that's why you see during some of these debates where people will bring something up and said, hey, you sponsored this bill or you whatever, and a lot of times you're like, if they're quoting language in the bill, they look like they've never even read it, because usually they don't read it. They don't even know what the fuck they're approving or not approving. There's a great podcaster, she's been on my show a few times, called Jen Brimey, and she has a show called Congressional Dish, and she literally reads everything and will dissect it. And she's said this over and over again. You can see the way people are going to vote on bills just by looking at who's giving the money. Like it's almost consistent every time.
It's so transparent now, though, right? I mean, because okay, so let me back up. First of all, I love your come from on all of this stuff. I mean, my gosh, Abramoff, holy shit! Alex Gibney did an amazing film on Abramoff, the United States of Abramoff, actually, and then he also
Casino
did
Jack.
Yeah, Casino Jack, and then he also did Client 9, which is Spitzer.
Yeah,
so
Spitzers. Yeah.
Spitzer, and Spitzer just spells it out, and he spells it out with 3 letters: other people's money, OPP. If you can work with other people's money and build these LLCs, and you were talking about offshoring and outsourcing, that is definitely part of it. Now, we've done that stuff going back, God, what, to the 70s probably, maybe 80s, and it's gotten worse. And so that drives home what we reveal to the world. The whole thing is what we call desupervision, decriminal, the 3 Ds, deregulation, desupervision, and decriminalization. And what does that mean, really? In a nutshell, it means that there is no law above the line. And if you're going to steal big, right? But what America doesn't know, like we went back to, because we keep getting played this over and over. I mean, a lot of these, so the great financial crisis of what we're talking about is literally the 3rd act of what was the S&L crisis in the early 90s, late 80s, right? Except the difference in those 2 particular cases was the savings and loan crisis was much more complicated because it was commercial real estate, but the regulators, led by a gentleman by the name of William K. Black, who became our mentor in this, and it's a miracle that we found him in this process, but he led us to understand how you put together what's known as a criminal referral. So we got to understand, and this is how we built our show, how you're able to get the evidence, put it together, and then create a criminal conviction. And they're called criminal referrals. And in the case of the S&L crisis, Bill did 30,000, well, his team, 30,000 criminal referrals to get over 1,000 high-level white-collar fraudsters, including the biggest bankruptcy in the United States at the time, a guy by the name of Keating, who bought several senators, to your point, at that time, including McCain. There were 5 senators at the time, the Keating 5 is what they called them. And, these senators were protecting these corrupt bankers. Now, interesting enough, and I'll mention this because I know you guys know about Epstein and the rest. Do you know what these guys did back then with senators to be able to coerce control? They'd invite them to parties in Miami and Las Vegas, get them all high up on cocaine and with hookers, and get it on video of them cheating on their spouses so that they knew how to control these cats when it came time to not let the regulators bust them. William K. Black worked through all of that, nailed 1,000 of them, and that was for a crime that was 180th the size of the 2008 Great Financial Crisis, which sent 0 people to prison. Although there was actually 2 people that went to prison. One was a Chinese banker that was in Manhattan who was like a fall guy, and of course he wasn't part of the crew and on the inside. And then there was some other small level type stuff. But none of the big guys went down. In fact, as we showcase in our show, especially when you get into episodes 4, Jamie Dimon met with President Obama 22 times while the Justice Department was investigating him. That's never been heard of. That's like Al Capone going to meet with who took down, I mean, who was the great investigator back then for Al Capone? I can't think of his name. Oh my God, it's on the top of my head.
Elliot Ness.
Elliot Ness, right? That's like, that's like those guys getting together. So our other partner always describes to me, imagine, because this is all just corruption, guys. It's not rocket science. You just have to have the who did what, when, and how, and who let them get away with it, because they run the shop. They run the show. That's what we're all in the midst of. I feel like we're on a 747 that's about to go freaking down hard because they're going to collect insurance on it. You know what I mean? That's the scheme. As long as these guys can, fuck the brakes up, fuck all the tapestry up, they're going to let everybody go through the facade of a fictional economy, and then they blow it up. Why? Because they got the keys to the Federal Reserve.
It's about to get blown up again.
It has been since September.
Yeah, it's crazy, and and to that point, of all the people that Ricky's mentioned, that's exactly why I wanted him to watch this and interview you, because he's got a bigger platform than I do. And I'm a little fish. I'm a little fish in this game, right? And I just recently, found Ricky, but I knew that he had some, he talked to people and he knows people that, if he were able to see it and was as excited about it as I am, and I've actually watched it 3 whole times looking for inconsistencies and
tell us. I got to hear what you have to say about it.
Well, no, it was the reason why I felt it was
let everybody know how many hours this is. To put it in perspective.
Okay, that's 18 hours. It's about 18 hours the screener is, and
how much cocaine?
6 hours.
How much cocaine did you need to watch?
None at all. I don't do that anymore.
That's a compliment a filmmaker could never have. You didn't need cocaine to get through 18 hours.
Well, because it was done in such a way that the first time around, it was done in such a way that I could picture myself as, since I'm in a labor union, I'm a mechanical insulator by trade. I could really resonate with the iron workers, right? And that's me, or that could have been me, and
in the future.
Yeah, and so it was really easy for me to identify with people and the victims, especially Addie Polk, because that my grandmother, died at 92. And she was exactly like that, that she could have been her. And so it made it really relatable. And the fact that it points out everything that we think of, just like in a flippant way. Oh yeah, shit's rigged, or, yeah, it's corrupt. But it goes as like, okay, it comes in and goes out, as if it's like the normal, like the new norm, right? Because we don't have any way of knowing how the actual game is played and carried out.
Absolutely. That's it. This is music to my ears. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. And so once it all kind of got put together, and then, through the process of me like taking charge of this and going, dude, I want to get this in front of Rogan. This is exactly what he Bill Black is the dude that he would like to talk to.
It answers everything he's been asking questions about since I've been watching him, and everybody else, because media has failed. The question you got to ask yourselves is, and I want you to tell me more, but I just got to make this point real quick. Why didn't the New York Times lay this out like we talked about Russiagate, right? Every day there was an echo chamber about, okay, what did Trump do? And I still, it's a different story, but, Trump is Trump, and that's a whole set of other problems, right? But I will tell you this. I do have to tell you this. President Trump sues Deutsche Bank in 2012. The reason he sues them is, first of all, they're the only ones that could give him loans. And you could, if you read a book called Dark Towers by David Heinrich, it spells out that, the stuff that he and Putin were involved with are relatively small compared to what they were doing, which is the story we're telling. Basically,
and they just got fined $150 million for their link to help launder money with Jeffrey Epstein.
There you go. Right. And so what they're involved with is just ginormous all over the world, probably 50 degrees of wrong that we can't even imagine, right? But in this book I read, and I couldn't believe this. In fact, we're in contact with this guy right now who's from the New York Times, David Heinrich, and I hope he blasts it to the world. But to your point about Addie Polk, and I told you guys the story up front of how she was targeted. The industry targeted her. They stole her house of 5 decades. She didn't get into a loan that she knew about. She was a victim of what we call straw buying. That's another part of the scam that we're going to relate. Well, you saw it in episode 2, actually, which is a whole nother can of. They go into churches, literally. They'd go into churches and they'd find elderly women who own their homes that they would take their information, they get their social security, and they'd forge their signatures to get loans in their names to go to guys that were fronting up as them that had that they were moving this stuff so fast. So Addie didn't know what the heck was going on. And so she ends up killing herself. And so that's a victim of predatory lending. Can we all agree to that?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, is there any problem with my setup there? Would anybody doubt me saying she is a victim of predatory lending?
No,
absolutely.
She absolutely is.
So get a load of this. President Trump sues Deutsche Bank for being a victim of predatory lending in 2012 and won. Well,
there is the difference there, and I think that, the whole reason, things have to line up to go viral, right? not everything. You has to be the right people to find it, the right story, the right message to get behind, the right everything. The stars have to align for something to go viral, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think this is got the potential. well, I think this has the potential to do that. I think that it is way better than the which one went viral? The
Inside Job?
No, the To Make a Murderer. Making a Murderer with the
Interestingly enough, our PR company actually did the PR for that. Yeah, Making a Murderer. It's like that, I think. Yeah, it's open-ended too.
Yeah, I mean, but this is actually something that really happened. It's gonna, when people see it, they're gonna go, oh my God, and it's gonna play into a bigger part of where we are at, and knowing that, look, if they've been playing this shit out since 1920 after the Great Depression and doing all of this to deregulate and do the things that are happening, now they have an open gate and they're getting ready to crash it again, right? We're going to go into something completely different now, and it's going to be into the commercial sector, because all of the building space and people that are going to start getting evicted because the money's going to run out. All of this is going to play out, and it's not going to be in the next 2 months.
Get to pick up all of that foreclosed property on the cheap. In fact, BlackRock owns a lot of that rental property in places like San Fran, and they're the ones who got it cheap during the Great Financial Crisis, and they hoovered it up in a second because they were the administrators. Get a load of this: BlackRock was the administrator of what became Maiden Lane, which was the precursor to quantitative easing, which led to this $29 trillion mammoth, what they call bazooka, from the Federal Reserve to their own pockets. Anyway, the long and the short of it is, they're doing it now. They're administering the CARES Act. They were put in place by Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, who of course came from where? Goldman Sachs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's just a repeat, and the only way that we're going to do anything about any of this as a nation or a population is call out the corruption, man. You can't do anything, and I'm going to use this analogy. They say that all lives can't matter until Black Lives Matter. Well, you know what? None of this other shit is going to even matter until you get rid of the corruption, because as long as the corruption is there, nothing will ever change.
Guys,
nothing.
I look, I grew up believing in the Justice League, right? In Superman, in Gotham, and all the good guys, and you take care of bad guys. Isn't that what it means to be an American? Yeah. That's what I thought. That's why none of this shit added up to me. That's why I had to go find out for myself, because I'm like, it can't be this difficult. It seems pretty simple, because I started with a real simple entry point. As a business guy, I knew when I was getting played. And I was getting played in a way that was like, whoa, this seems to be systemic. And little did I know how big and systemic it was. And that's what it was. I mean, it was a 9-year journey to get the $29 trillion truth. And that's what we did.
I mean, look at the vulture loans. I mean, I'm sure you guys are familiar with that. These banks will go to these poor countries and be like, "Hey, we'll get you out of debt. We'll buy your debt and get you out of debt." And then they just control these countries. I mean, banks have so much control internationally. And I mean, look at the euro. I mean, how I was born in Portugal. I mean, there's a lot of conspiracy theories on how that was one step closer to like a one world government type thing, but it didn't benefit a lot of countries, and it hurt a lot of countries. And I think anytime you give that many people power, it can be dangerous. The other thing too is we don't look at blue collar crime the same way we look at other crimes, and that's a huge issue. Blue collar
crime the same way. So instead of shooting 1 or 2 people in a murder, they just wipe out tens of millions, and then they get away with trillions. The goons on the sidewalk that are working for the local, mob, man, these guys don't hold a candle to the level of criminality we're talking about. And Ricardo, I got to tell you, man, you know this stuff, but I think is he going to be surprised by the information that we lay out in this? Sean, do you think? Because he knows it all, but he doesn't know the details.
One thing I like about the documentary, and I haven't watched all of it yet. I'm still getting through it. Is I do like the fact that at least from it seems like there's a very like there's character development, right? Like you open up with the suicide and all that stuff. And somebody like me, I love documentaries that are full of information and like are just hard hitting, like connecting dots or whatever. But somebody like my wife, for example, if there's not a story, if there's not characters, they just completely just, you know, they're like, oh, I'm not interested. You know, they just are completely, you know, they lose interest. And I think sometimes you need to do that. I mean, some of my favorite documentaries are a little bit of both. Are ones that it's personal. I mean, I had Chris Bell on. I'm sure you're probably familiar with him. He did Bigger, Stronger, Faster, Prescription Dogs, and he talks about his own personal experiences with addiction and all that stuff, and telling that story while he's telling you the story of prescription, how, I mean, similar to this story, how the regulators and the companies that they're supposed to regulate are all in bed together and helping each other out. The FDA and Big Pharma, it's a revolving door like a lot of other departments. Yeah. He tells that story, but he also gives you an inside personal look at his life and other people's tragic experiences. And I think for some people, they kind of need those personal stories to put a face to it. I mean, it's like that quote, if one person dies, it's a tragedy, it's a tragic, and if a million people die, it's a statistic.
You got one person, then they pay attention. You're absolutely right on every single point. And I got to say how appreciative I am of both of you to honor me with the opportunity to speak about this project, because, you know, to your point, Ricardo, ultimately, the nature of the revolving door, right? The nature of common knowledge versus specific knowledge, all of these different elements that you have, when you put that together with firm, and this is actually something we haven't talked about, and I got to finish up with this because I've got to jump to another call, but we have guys that are the heads of the FBI in our program, head of the DOJ, and I'm talking third in the FBI under Comey and Mueller. This guy, Chris Wecker, was the director of investigations, assistant director of investigations for the FBI. He had this dead to rights, and they suppressed him. They suborned him. Same with our guy at the DOJ who worked for Holder and Lanny Brewer. They suborned him. We've got him on camera telling us what happened. We got the guys from the SEC. We got the AGs. This is one thing for us to be talking. I mean, we got the whistleblowers on one hand. We've got the victims, like you have said, and then we've got all of the guys that were the ones that could have stopped this, but because of political appointees and the corruption, weren't able to. So we've got something for everybody, because if you're paranoid about conspiracies, yeah, it's even bigger and worse than you think. If you want to blame the Obama administration, you're not wrong. If you want to blame Trump, you're not wrong. Why? Because they're all in on it. That's the point. Yeah. This is our system. And if you believe in life, liberty, and justice for all, if you believe in equality of law, if you believe in equal opportunity, that ain't happening under this system. This system is, you're a commodity. You're going to be chattel being carried out to slaughter. Good luck. I'm not chattel, guys. I don't know about you. I'm not expendable. Chances are you're not either.
Yeah. So before we let you go, because I know you said you have to go, let people know when the film's coming out, where can they see it? What's, all the future plans you have for this film?
So we're going to have a live broadcast, and we're making it free to the public, and you can watch it on August 5th. It's going to be 8 p.m. live, Eastern time, Eastern Daylight Time, Eastern 8 p.m. I think I already said that. And it's going to be on Facebook Live, but it's also going to be on YouTube Live. And we're going to have, should make news, I hope. We're going to have the guys from the task force in Ohio who got this right on camera with the guy from the FBI who was doing this nationwide. And we're going to, because I'm going to moderate it, make the world understand how the FBI didn't nail this. And they're going to get firsthand taste of how the system can get mucked up or obfuscated, or, the good guys not being able to do their job because they got their hands tied behind their back by the bad guys who are corrupt. That's what we're talking about. So that'll happen on the 5th of August. We're making it free. We're going to make the first episode free indefinitely. It'll be on YouTube. It'll be everywhere. Then we'll be on platforms everybody can download for $10. For the rest of the time, it'll be like on Amazon. It'll be on Apple Plus. More news to come. So go to www.thecon.tv and you can sign up for updates, and we'll get you all of that information. But I will finish with this. We should be on Netflix, honestly. We should be on HBO, but we're not. Do I know why we're not? I don't necessarily. Do I know that they've seen the series? I think some have. In fact, Netflix just announced that they're going to give $100 million to Black communities around the country in wake of Black Lives Matter and that sort of thing. And we have a story of an African American woman who committed shot herself that leads to this Pandora's box of the entire system. It's a miracle through a tragedy. And you would think Netflix would be all over this, but they're not. But then you go, or at least they haven't made us an offer yet. And you go, well, how do they do their debt financing? Well, they get it from the same guys we're exposing. That's our system. And so we got to do a workaround until we're mainstream or however it's going to work. We got to glob on to the millions of people that have been impacted by this. I talked to the pensioners the other day. There's 4 million strong that are going to be involved with going nuts about this. Same with black churches around America. And it's starting to groundswell, but we can't get the word out fast enough because, you know, the system doesn't want this out.
Yeah, so I'll put links to all that stuff in the show description on our YouTube channel, so people can get easy access to the Facebook page, and I'll try to get your YouTube channel where everywhere this film's going to be streamed live. I'll put those links there so people can watch it. And Sean, you want to let people know about your show and any upcoming plans you might have?
Well, I'm just Nowhere to Go But Up podcast, and I talk about bottoms, life struggles, and how people get through them.
Which is relevant. And in between, it's relevant to this because I mean a lot of people are on the bottom working their way up because of this issue. Yeah. Yeah.
And so my show's my show's kind of taken on a different life of its own. Like tonight, I'm going to be interviewing Amy Pova, who was a recipient of clemency through Clinton. And part of how the war on drugs and conspiracy ties into giving people exorbitant amounts of time for nonviolent crimes and low-level drug offenses through conspiracy. And people are, given 24, 33 life sentences, when you can kill somebody and only do 20 in the state level. So I'll be talking to her, and like I said, it just takes on a life of its own. Corruption is where I think we need to focus on. Not everybody can get on the same page about parties and this and that, but everybody can get on board with not being cool with corruption, right? Amen. I mean, and really, what is this? It's what we're seeing, the civil unrest in the streets and everything that's happening right now is just a symptom of corruption.
Absolutely.
It's it.
It's divide and conquer. I mean, it's divide. Yeah. They're dividing us and conquer, and yet we're all being screwed by the same people. It's
right. And everybody's got to come to the truth because it's the power inside the circle, and they've gotten us. I mean, this is so paint by the numbers history, guys. I mean, you can see this play out a gazillion times throughout history, and it's like, but how we don't know that is just phenomenal to me. But thanks to guys like you, I pray that we get to the people that need to hear this because I'm sick and tired of people being strung out and basically hung out to dry. I want people to rally around the truth and demand justice and demand accountability because this country is dead. It is doomed if we don't get a hold of this now. I think it's maybe too late considering everything that's going on. I don't know. I hope not. But we need literally millions of people to be able to get to this thing. And why is that a possibility? Well, because tens of millions of people got screwed by the system. And that's why it's still the same story. It's not an autopsy of something that happened 12 years ago. It's a story of how what didn't happen 12 years ago made now inevitable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's why I always tell people, I'm like, share these shows. I tell people you can post it anywhere you want. My shows are all about trying to get these conversations out there as quickly and as fast as possible. And obviously with all the, the big tech censorship, I know Zuckerberg was being talked to today about some of his biasness or whatever, but you need people to do their part in kind of just spreading these conversations, spreading documentaries, share these links with people. I mean, I call this podcast a Ripple Effect podcast because I truly believe in the ripple effect, this idea that we can all make a difference and we can all and you never know who you're reaching and how far that reach is going to go. So people listening, share this stuff. If you think this conversation is important, any documentary, anything, just share that stuff and try to open people's eyes because we're all getting screwed by the same people and they're getting us to fight amongst one another and making us think that we're much more different than we really are when really, the people who are pulling the strings, they don't give a shit about our skin color or ideology, our race, our religion. They just care about money and power. And that's the only thing that they, that's holy to them. So
and you think it's one and the same, right? But it like Sean said at the very beginning, man, when you understand MMT, look, guys, I'll finish up with this note because I am just so grateful for you guys, but I really want your listeners to understand this. And same with you guys. And I hope, Ricardo, if you get a chance to watch it, that you'll let us know what you think. But listen, like I said, the Pecora hearing happened right after the Great Depression because FDR had the political courage to do it, which means that he reined power in. Because think about what happened in World War II, or what led up to World War II. Half the world went to communism, a lot of the world went to fascism, and we went to the law. and we won. And we won, became a force of good. And that's what I've always believed in. And that's what this is about. You know, it's really good versus evil. Evil to me is deception, 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 deception. This whole system is deception. And, you know, we can't overcome it only if people get hip to the facts. And I swear it's not complicated. It's so easy once you know what's up. And hopefully there's more of us that aren't a part of the rot and want to be a part of the fix. And the only way that happens is the ripple effect.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that because in James Corbett's documentary, The Century of Enslavement, he talks about that, how like the idea that economics and the whole system is too complicated for an average person to understand. They do that on purpose. So you just think, you throw your hands up and you're like, well, I just don't get it. It's like, no, you're getting screwed. It's not that hard to get. And if somebody explains it to you in a manner, you know, that they're not trying to trick you, because in many cases they're trying to trick you and to convince you that like, hey, you just don't get it. It's too complicated. And that's not the case at all. So I think, you know, documentaries like yours and these type of conversations hopefully will get people more interested in these topics. I mean, we need to know how to, you know, the fact that the Fed's printing money out of nowhere, creating more debt, the fact that banks are loaning out money that doesn't really exist, and creating all these issues.
They use it to create a fictional asset value that they control. That's the whole deception. That's what
they're all about capitalism until it's time to get bailed out, and then it's like, hey, I like socialism. How about you give me some of the taxpayers' money?
I call it corporate fascism undergirded by a criminal syndicate. And look, guys, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm cool with people making money, but not when they're destroying grandmothers. You know what I mean? I think it's like, you know, you want to go deal fucking marijuana to some guy who likes to smoke pot? Okay, whatever. You want to sell a record? That's fucking awesome. You want to, you know, be a basketball star and make millions of dollars because millions of people watch you? Amen, man. Kick ass, right? No, you do not get to destroy the American dream because of your corruption. That to me is where it's like, no. And we got to get people to understand that, because that's what's been going on way too long. And it takes a couple of middle-aged guys like us to tell the world how it goes, because we've lived it. We've seen it, right?
Yeah, just like a trip to the strip club, man. You know, you're gonna get screwed, but you're not gonna get laid. You know what I'm saying? And I used to work it once. So I'd watch that shit all the time. Guys would come in there and dropping hundreds and dollars, thousands of dollars, man. And it's like, God, you're so stupid, man. You're not going to get laid.
Yeah, totally. Guys, what you were saying tonight, Sean, you got 2.5 million prisoners, right, in the United States. I think we've got the largest prison population in the world. We've got the lowest conviction of white-collar criminals in our history over the Trump administration. And it was really bad during the Obama administration. The bad guys are above the law, guys. That's not the United States.
Absolutely.
No, it's not.
Hey,
well, that's what we're here to do. Expose the bullshit so we can get on with real living.
Right on, fellas. Let's hopefully change things for the better.
Yeah. Well,
thanks,
guys. Hey, thanks, guys. I really, really appreciate your time. I don't want to hold you up anymore, Patrick, because I know you're a busy guy, and you're a go-getter, so you're probably going to get something. You probably have like 8 other business meetings and all this other stuff going on. But
I got calls. We're doing PR right now. It's fantastic.
Oh, awesome.
I'm so happy that people are interested in talking to us.
Awesome. Well, we'll keep in touch. I'll send you the links once the show's up and live. You guys can post it, share it anywhere you want. And thanks, Sean, for joining me. I really appreciate you exposing me to this documentary and this whole project.
No, thank you, man. And hopefully it makes it where it needs to, and you get it in front of the eyes that need to see it.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you both. Be well, guys.
Hey, thanks, guys. Brother. Take care. Keep in touch. Take care.
Bye.